With Bayern crashing out of the Champions League at the hands of King Unai, naturally questions are going to be asked of this Bayern team and their manager, Julian Nagelsmann. There are all sorts of rumors abound. For the second consecutive season, they will lose a senior squad member for free. First Alaba, now Sule, hoisting further questions upon that backline that definitely has talent, but major and constant injury concerns. Now there's murmurs of Lewandowski not resigning his contract ahead of his June 2023 expiry, which hoists more questions at the opposite end of the pitch as well, of whether
Lewandowski
will leave. For a club that is seemingly transitioning amongst their squad and the people behind the scenes, that makes things difficult for the German Giants. Hello, how are you? I'm Adrian and welcome to Rabona TV for this Bayern conversation. As always, I brought in Manuel Witt from Transfermarkt, Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. He covers Bayern for Forbes, and he's a good friend of mine. And a fellow member of the Unsackable podcast. That's me, Manuel, Filippo from Tactical Manager TV, and Josh from One Soccer and JJD TV. Hey, look, give us a follow and a rating if you're interested in or are already listening to Unsackable. New episodes out every week. But anyway, let's get into this great conversation with Manuel, where we'll cover it all. Manuel, Bayern are out of the Pokal, they're out of the Champions League, but they still boast a lead in the Bundesliga. What's the perception in Munich right now? Is there as big of a problem? Is there as much doom around the club as there is in the media, as they're trying to make it seem?
It's a little bit of a Niko Kovac season, right?
Yes.
Just the one title. It's kind of demeaning, and I think it says a lot also about the state of German football in general. The fact that now the Bundesliga title is not enough. Obviously they're going to win the 10th title in a row. No team in any of the top 4 leagues has ever done that. Juventus, of course, held the record with 9. Bayern equalized that record and going to break it this year. Which is kind of telling to where the state of German football is in general, I find. And then it's kind of fitting, of course, that Germany's best team goes out against the 7th place team in La Liga, a league that seems to have a bit of a resurgence. So it is kind of a little bit doom and gloom. Doom and gloom that's not just at Bayern, but maybe at German football in general. And I think, sometimes that kind of result can be a good wake-up call. On the one hand, but on the other hand, you're absolutely right. It's been really interesting. I wrote an article for Forbes, even though I'm technically on holiday this week, but I did an article for Forbes kind of outlining some of the stuff that's going on behind closed doors. And I mean, for the last 2 weeks, we've been only talking about Lewandowski and what his future is going to be like. And he's just one of many. I could have also written about Serge Gnabry or Thomas Muller or Manuel Neuer or or Julian Nagelsmann or Oliver Kahn. All of these stories are all things that are going on in the background at the moment and are not exactly conducive towards a club getting the results it needs internationally.
There have been plenty of changes at Bayern, and not just Hansi Flick for Nagelsmann, as the former CEO Karl-Heinz Rummenigge was replaced by German national team and Bayern Munich legend Oliver Kahn. Naturally, there is always going to be a bleeding in process, and naturally, his first season was always going to be a bit difficult, a bit of a learning season for Kahn, with Rummenigge leaving the club after being the chairman of the executive board for about 2 decades. But prior to his time as the chairman of the executive board, Rummenigge was the vice president for Bayern for 11 years. When we look at some of the issues going on sort of behind the scenes, give us the Sparks Notes version of what's going on behind the scenes at Bayern, because it does sort of feel like they're not all pulling in the same direction necessarily.
Yeah, no, they're not. There was actually a really telling interview by the former CEO Karl-Heinz Rummenigge as well in Kicker. Credit where it's credit due. And he sort of said he doesn't think that, and not everyone is pulling in the same direction. And then Süddeutsche Zeitung had a really interesting story this morning about Oliver Kahn and whether he has the aura of a Uli Hoeneß, where, Uli Hoeneß, if he didn't like something, if he didn't like an interview by a player, he would either go phone the agent and talk to the agent, what can we fix, or he would phone the agent and yell at the agent, or he would go to the player directly and invite him for white sausage breakfast, afternoon coffee, and just talk it out. And there is this sort of understanding right now that Oliver Kahn is a modern manager who's maybe not as familiar with the people at the club. And so you get this sort of sense that there's almost this transition that it's a transition away from this familiarity to a more plasticky kind of multinational corporation, if that makes sense. And of course, some of that is also journalists who maybe feel themselves a little bit out of the cold, or maybe miss that familiarity with the club, because it is something, Bayern Munich used to be a small entity, and now it's a 850 people company. So maybe there's a little bit of that, but I mean, there is also that is a culture change, and culture change always comes with a lot of problems, of course.
As we talked about domestically, things are going fine for Bayern, at least in the Bundesliga. But Bayern is bordering on one of those teams where the new managers that come in are almost a victim of the previous successes at Bayern. With their dominance and the chance that they will make it 10 Bundesliga titles consecutively, winning the league has almost lost its sheen in some respects. That respect being that when something becomes an expectation, winning that title won't do you any favors if you fail elsewhere during your end of season reviews, basically. But as we have gone over with Manuel, there is something to be said of all of the success that Bayern has had, not just affecting how achievements are viewed for managers, but it also is causing the more senior figures within the squad, those who have been there for years and don't have any further trophies to win, to question whether they want to see things through at Bayern for the rest of their career, or have one last crack somewhere else to experience a different country and league. And maybe this is just lazy sort of assumptions that I'm making, but you look at the players like Sule, for example, who's already confirmed to be leaving. Do you give any credence to sort of a lack of certainty around, Sule leaving, Lewandowski's future at Bayern coupled with Sule getting picked away? Last season, Alaba chose to leave as well. Is there a feeling that this is all sort of having a destabilizing effect on the squad, and that maybe Bayern isn't seen as this attractive option that it used to be at one point?
I mean, yes, in a nutshell, absolutely. But I think there's different reasons why these players are leaving. But I mean, it all does boil down to one thing. Sule did not feel appreciated, but he also wanted a challenge. He wanted to, essentially, one of these things, that was a big thing for him. It wasn't money in the end. He wanted to win a Bundesliga title at a club where the Bundesliga title means something, and that was Borussia Dortmund. I mean, he's now won the Champions League. He's won the German Championship many times. But I think for one really big important thing for him was, let's see if I can do the same thing with Dortmund. So there's that. With Thiago, there's a player, also very important player who left. He went to Liverpool for a lot of the same reasons. He had won everything with Bayern Munich, and there was a point where he wanted to do something new and different. I think the same is kind of true with David Alaba, even though I think money was a big factor in his case as well. But I mean, fair enough, these players are professionals. That's not me saying he went for money. No, yes, he also went for the money, but let's be honest, it's also a different experience playing it for Real Madrid under Ancelotti and winning a title there than it is when you have already won everything for Bayern. And I think with Lewandowski, it goes into the same category. Money is a big factor, but I think there's also that sense okay, I'm 33, I'm turning 34 this summer. Can I do this with Barcelona? Can I do this with Real Madrid? Can I maybe go to England and do it there? And I think that is something that is kind of pulling the club in all directions. And then of course, as well, even though Bayern Munich are financially the third richest club in the world, you have to remember they have to generate that profit themselves.
Right.
All the money that's coming in. And yes, people will say they have a sponsorship deal with Qatar. That sponsorship deal is about 20 to 30 million euros a year. As I just said, they gross about 630 to 700 million euros a year. That's a very small percentage of the money that's coming in, right? Everything has to be earned and paid by the sponsors, and it has to be generated in the first place. So they're in a very different position than, let's say, Man City or even a Liverpool, where the owner can always put in extra money. That doesn't happen there. So for them, they get kind of pulled in all these different directions with players looking for new challenges, but also they have guys like Leroy Sané, who they signed to a really big contract and then sent a benchmark. And they're not really in a position where they can go to Lewandowski and say, okay, we're going to increase your 24 million euro salary to 30 million euros. Because they still have to go and sign Thomas Müller, and they still have to go sign Manuel Neuer. And they will say, okay, if Lewandowski earns this much, we have to earn this much. And they all then want 3-year contracts. And then all of a sudden you have 300 million euros tied down in 3 players. That's a lot of money for guys that are in their late 30s. And
it absolutely is.
And I just don't think they're able to do it.
When things began to sour, Niko Kovac was ousted in November of 2019. And then the quotes came out after of how the players didn't like his playing style, how someone such as Thomas Müller wasn't central to the team as he should be, etc. As Manuel said earlier, Bayern are having a bit of a Kovac season in that they are only, in massive air quotes, in contention and the favorites for the Bundesliga. But in his first season with Bayern, Kovac won both the Pokal and the league, and the Super Cup as well, if you want to count that also. And so, with Nagelsmann in the running for just one trophy, how much pressure will be on the young German manager? I mean, that 5-0 Pokal loss to Borussia Mönchengladbach with a full-strength Bayern team did not look good. But yes, how much pressure is he under? Nagelsmann comes in from RB Leipzig, and we've mentioned him a lot, Niko Kovac, and there were some similarities that I was trying to see because, Kovac tried 3 at the back, but both of their approaches to the game are very different, even though they do share, that Nagelsmann does like to employ 3 at the back quite often. Very, very different. I was looking at points per game. Nagelsmann is still better. I was looking at goals per game. Nagelsmann is still better. Maybe the defense has a little more issues, but there's a lot of variables there. So looking at Nagelsmann, it's a different situation to that of Kovac. Regarding the patience that he'll receive from the board, is he still seen as a centerpiece to a larger Bayern project, and he'll be given a few seasons to get it right? Or will they be equally as ruthless with him, let's say, if things don't go as well at the beginning of next season?
They paid 25 million euros in a transfer fee for him.
Yeah.
They better be patient. I mean, I personally don't think they have a choice to be other than being patient. They paid. If Nagelsmann was a football player, he'd be in the top 10 of most expensive transfers in the history. Oh, sorry, maybe it's the top 25. It's the top 25.
Yeah.
Fact checking myself here, but you get the gist. He was an expensive deal for this club, and that doesn't even include his salary. And I think you don't really have a choice other than being patient.
With all of this considered, it certainly feels as though Bayern are going through a transitional period, not only at the board level, but within the squad as well. A generation of players who were central to their success are either aging, have already left in the case of Alaba, are leaving in the case of Sule, though he was a later addition, not quite that senior core, or are allegedly considering a future away from Bayern. Couple that with some of the areas of the pitch that need to be addressed for Bayern. In my opinion, mostly in defense, but if they are to lose Lewandowski, yikes. But anyway, all of that considered, this has to be the best time to strike for opposing Bundesliga teams, you would think, no?
They are bringing in Nagelsmann players. Ryan Gravenberch from Ajax and Masroni from Ajax are close to being done. I do have the sense that Oliver Kahn was quite clear that Lewandowski will not be allowed to leave in the summer. So we're probably entering his last year. So at some point or other, they will have to bring in a new striker, which is going to be extremely difficult because I looked at the market and I looked at the names that have been been floating, someone like Patrick Schick or Sasic, the kid from Salzburg, or Kalajdzic from Stuttgart, and another name, and sorry, Etienne, to say that because I know you're a Benfica fan.
I knew it was coming.
David Nunez. But even Nunez, who I personally think he's the most obvious candidate, he's not a Lewandowski yet.
No.
Don't quote. I want to really importantly say that I personally think Nunez is probably the most interesting striker on the market out there. I think potentially even more interesting than Haaland because he doesn't have the injury record that Haaland has. But he is not a Lewandowski yet. And he's a different player. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he will be a different type of striker. He's Absolutely. A complete striker, but he's a different striker. He's not Lewandowski.
No.
So then all of a sudden you have to change the way you play around him. So there will be a lot of new names, and there's a big transition coming in. And I was joking on the Gegenpressing podcast that we recorded earlier today, if there only was a team that could actually make the most of Bayern hurting, because they are hurting. I wish there was a team in the Bundesliga that could actually make use of this. And maybe next year there will be with Leipzig, but it is all very interesting because that is a lot of turnover. It's only going to be more turnover because the question, of course, is what happens if Gnabry doesn't extend and does go to Real Madrid, has been rumored, right? And so you have to replace him. And the most obvious candidate is Adeyemi, who is close to joining Dortmund. And I personally, as a bystander, and I've been accused online of being a Bayern fan. I'm not. I assure you, I'm not. I just cover them because they are. I cover German football, and they are 80% of what German football coverage is. So obviously, you jump on that, and I find it very fascinating as a bystander watching it because it is a really interesting transition. And we talked about how difficult the transition would be 2 or 3 years ago, not realizing that the transition was still coming because 3 of the most important players this club are now unreplaceable. Are Neuer, Muller, and Lewandowski, and they're all in the mid-30s, and the time is coming. And I don't see replacements for them.
And do you get the feeling now that next season, with all of the sort of, we'll call it turmoil, quote unquote turmoil right now at Bayern, and with the players that could be leaving, does next season sort of feel like the best chance for someone else to sort of take first place from Bayern?
Yeah, I only see really one team, and that's Leipzig. Dortmund, I mean, if they get Sule and Schlotterbeck, then all of a sudden their defense is really good.
Yeah.
and I think that has been a big Achilles heel for them. Obviously, they will have to replace Haaland. I think that's pretty much a given. I know Mateschitz is still the almighty Red Bull owner. Mateschitz is still really angry that Bayern stole Upamecano and Nagelsmann from him. I could see him say, well, we're keeping Adeyemi within Red Bull.
Yeah.
And we're taking a run at them. And then in Nkunku, they probably have one of the most informed forwards. I don't even want to call him a striker because that's not really what he is.
No.
In the world at the moment. And they are working very hard of extending his contract. And I think they're going to. And even if they don't, and there is no exit clause, so like they can keep him. I feel like if they are able to keep all of this together, and Tedesco obviously has done a very, very good job. I feel the season would have been a lot more interesting if he had been the coach to start with Leipzig, because the record obviously under him has been phenomenal, right?
Yeah.
It would have been a very different season maybe this year. It's not, but I think Tedesco will have a full summer to work with this team. The players really love him. You hear so many positives coming out of them. They really appreciate the way he works with them. The work he has done to stabilize the Nagelsmann systems, quickly shut down what Marsch wanted to go back to, the traditional Red Bull model, right? And he's really quickly established them back to what Nagelsmann tried to put in. And I think the players really like it. And the players, and you see it, the players really enjoy playing for him.
But what do you guys think? Is this just a blip in Bayern's form and they will be back to dominating both domestically and at the continental level very, very soon? Or are they due for a few more competitive years domestically and some dogfights in the Champions League? Let me know. Excited to hear your guys' takes on it. Other than that, though, thank you for watching. I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday. And by the way, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. All right. Ciao, guys.